Silas Grant stood at the altar with his hand outstretched and his eyes seeing nothing. The woman beside him did not take his hand right away. She was looking at the faces in the church, men grinning like they had won something, women whispering behind their gloves, and she was deciding whether to run. But she had nowhere to run to, so she took his hand. It was warm and steady, and his fingers closed around hers with surprising gentleness for a man who had been tricked into this. Stories like this one stay with you because they remind you that worth is not always visible to the eye. Sometimes it takes a different kind of seeing altogether. If you want more stories that cut straight to the heart, subscribe so you never miss one. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Because what happened in the weeks after that wedding became the kind of story people told their grandchildren. The kind that proved love has nothing to do with sight and everything to do with recognition. Silas Grant had been blind for 7 years. It happened in the winter of 1879, when he was working a claim up near Silver Ridge, Wyoming. A blast went wrong. The dynamite detonated too soon, and he was standing too close. When he woke up 3 days later in a doctor's office in Hardin Creek, the world was black. The doctor said the damage was permanent. Silas was 26 years old, and he would never see again. For a while, he tried to keep working the claim. But mining is dangerous work, even for a man who can see, and after he nearly walked off the edge of a cliff, his father convinced him to come home to the ranch. Silas hated it. He hated needing help. He hated the pity in people's voices. He hated the way women who used to smile at him in town now looked away like blindness was catching. So he stopped going to town. He stayed on the ranch and learned to navigate by touch and sound and memory. And he told himself he did not need anyone. His father died in the spring of 1886. Heart gave out while he was mending fence. Silas found him 3 hours later, following the sound of the wind rattling through the wire. After the funeral, Silas was alone on 300 acres, with a herd of cattle he could not see, and a house that echoed. The men in town decided he needed a wife. It started as a joke in the saloon. Someone said Silas Grant ought to get married. And someone else said, what woman would marry a blind man with nothing to offer? And then Dutch Keller, drunk and mean and always looking for entertainment, said he would pay $50 to any woman desperate enough to take him. $50 was 6 months' wages for most women. It was a fortune. And it was enough to make men start thinking about which women in Hardin Creek were desperate enough to say yes. Clara May Hewitt was desperate enough. She was 23 years old, and she had been working at the boarding house for 4 years, cleaning rooms and washing sheets, and dodging the hands of men who thought a woman in service had no right to say no. She was a big woman, heavy through the waist and hips, with thick arms and a face that was plain and tired. Her father had died when she was 16. Her mother followed 2 years later. Clara had no family, no money, and no prospects. When Dutch Keller walked into the boarding house and told her about the bet, she did not even hesitate. $50? She said. $50. You marry him, you get the money. You can leave the day after if you want. He will never know the difference. Why would anyone do this? Dutch grinned. It was not a kind grin. Entertainment. Clara thought about the room she shared with 2 other women. She thought about the boarding house owner who docked her wages every time a guest complained about anything. She thought about the man last week who had cornered her in the hallway and put his hands on her, and when she shoved him away, he told the owner she had been rude, and she lost 2 days' pay. I will do it, she said. The wedding was arranged for the following Saturday. Someone told Silas that a woman had agreed to marry him, a respectable widow, they said, who needed a home and was willing to help on the ranch. Silas did not believe a word of it, but he was tired of being alone, and he figured even a bad marriage was better than talking to himself for the rest of his life. So he said yes. The church was full on the day of the wedding. Half the town came, not to celebrate, but to watch. Clara walked down the aisle in a borrowed dress that did not fit right, and when she reached the altar, Silas turned his head toward the sound of her footsteps. Clara, he said. Yes, her voice was steady. They said you were a widow. They lied. There was a long silence. The preacher cleared his throat. Shall we proceed? Silas could have said no. He could have walked out. But he heard something in Clara's voice, a flatness, a resignation, that sounded like his own. So he held out his hand, and after a moment, She took it. They were married in less than 10 minutes. When the preacher said Silas could kiss his bride, Silas turned his face toward her and waited. Clara leaned in and kissed him on the cheek. Quick, businesslike. The men in the back pews laughed. Dutch Keller handed Clara an envelope as they walked out of the church. $50, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Pleasure doing business with you. Clara took the money and did not look at him. Silas stood beside her, his hand on her elbow, his face expressionless. Someone in the crowd said something that made the others laugh. Clara's fingers tightened on the envelope. They rode back to the ranch in a borrowed wagon. Neither of them spoke. When they arrived, Silas climbed down and turned to help Clara, but she was already on the ground. She did not wait for him. She walked into the house and shut the door behind her. Silas stood in the yard for a long time, listening to the wind. Inside, Clara looked around at the house she would live in for however long this lasted. It was small. 2 rooms downstairs, a loft above. The furniture was sparse and worn. Dust covered everything. There were dirty dishes in the basin, and clothes piled on a chair, and the smell of a place where a man had been living alone for too long. She rolled up her sleeves and started cleaning. By the time Silas came in an hour later, the dishes were washed and the floor was swept, and the windows were open to let in the air. He stood in the doorway and tilted his head, listening. "You are still here," he said. "Where else would I go? I thought you might take the money and leave." "I thought about it." She wrung out the rag she had been using to wipe down the table. "But I have nowhere to go. And you paid for a wife. You might as well get one." He did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. The first few days were difficult. Clara cooked and cleaned and kept to herself. Silas worked outside, doing what he could with the cattle and the fences, moving slowly and carefully, counting his steps. They ate meals in silence. At night, Clara slept in the bedroom downstairs, and Silas climbed up to the loft. They lived like strangers in the same house. But Clara noticed things. She noticed that Silas woke before dawn every morning and made his own coffee, feeling his way around the kitchen with a sureness that came from years of practice. She noticed that he never asked for help, even when he knocked into the corner of the table hard enough to bruise. She noticed that his hands were scarred from work, and his shoulders were tense, like he was always bracing for something to go wrong. And she noticed that he was kind. One morning she burned the biscuits. She had been distracted, thinking about the $50 hidden in her trunk and what she would do with it. And by the time she smelled the smoke, it was too late. She pulled the pan from the oven and stared at the blackened lumps, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. Silas came in from outside and stopped in the doorway. "Something burning?" "The biscuits. I ruined them." He came to the table and sat down. "I have eaten worse." "They are inedible." "Then we will have something else." His voice was calm, easy. "It is not the end of the world, Clara." She looked at him sitting there with his sightless eyes and his patient expression, and something in her chest cracked. This man had been humiliated in front of the entire town. He had been tricked into marrying a woman he did not know for the entertainment of drunks. And he was telling her that burned biscuits did not matter. That afternoon she made stew. She had found potatoes and carrots in the cellar and a haunch of venison hanging in the smokehouse. She cut everything into small pieces and let it simmer for hours with salt and pepper and a handful of dried herbs she found in a tin on the shelf. The smell filled the house, rich and savory and warm. When Silas came in for supper, he stopped just inside the door. "That smells good," he said, and there was something in his voice she had not heard before. Hunger, maybe, or hope. She ladled stew into 2 bowls and set one in front of him with a piece of bread. He felt for the spoon, found it, dipped it into the bowl, took a bite, stopped. "This is really good," he said. "It is just stew." "No," he shook his head. "It is more than that." She did not know what he meant, and she did not ask. But she saw the way his shoulders relaxed as he ate, and she felt something shift between them, something small but real. The days began to take on a shape. Clara rose early and cooked breakfast. Silas worked outside, and she worked inside, and at noon, they ate together. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and listened to the sounds of the ranch, the cattle lowing in the distance, the wind in the grass, the creak of the barn door. They did not talk much, but the silence was not uncomfortable anymore. One evening, Clara asked him about the accident. She had been wondering for days, but had not known how to bring it up. Finally, she just said it. "What happened to your eyes?" Silas was quiet for a long time. Then he told her. The mine, the blast, waking up in the dark and realizing the dark was permanent. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Seeing?" "Every day." His voice was quiet. "I miss colors most. I remember what they look like, but it is getting harder. Like trying to remember a song you have not heard in years." "What color do you miss most?" He thought about it. "Blue. Sky blue. The kind you get on a clear morning when there is not a cloud anywhere." Clara looked up at the sky. It was that exact color. "It is blue now," she said. "Sky blue. Not a cloud anywhere." He smiled. It was the first time she had seen him smile, and it changed his whole face. After that, she started describing things to him. Not everything. Just the things she thought he might want to know. The way the light hit the mountains in the afternoon. The color of the wildflowers that grew near the creek. The shape of the clouds before a storm. He listened to every word. One night in late September, Clara was washing dishes when Silas came in from the barn. He was limping slightly, favoring his left leg. She dried her hands and went to him. "You are hurt." "Just twisted my ankle. It is nothing." "Sit down." He started to argue, but she pointed at the chair and he sat. She knelt in front of him and unlaced his boot, pulled it off carefully. His ankle was swollen and already turning purple. "You need to stay off this," she said. "I have work to do." "The work will wait." She went to the cellar and brought back a cloth soaked in cold water. She wrapped it around his ankle and looked up at him. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. "Does it hurt?" "Yes." "Why did you not say something earlier?" "Because I did not want to be a burden." The words hit her like a slap. She sat back on her heels. "You are not a burden." "I am blind, Clara. Everything I do takes twice as long. I need help with things a grown man should be able to do himself." You are a man who got hurt and is too stubborn to ask for help." Her voice was sharp. "That does not make you a burden. That makes you human." He turned his face toward her. "Why did you stay?" "What?" "After the wedding. You had the money. You could have left. Why did you stay?" Clara stood up and went back to the basin. She picked up a plate and dried it slowly. "Because I had nowhere else to go." "That is not the whole truth." "No." She set the plate down, turned to face him. "I stayed because you did not treat me like I was worthless. Every man I have known has looked at me and seen nothing worth keeping. You could not see me at all, and you still treated me with more respect than any of them." The silence stretched between them, heavy and full. "I see you," Silas said quietly. "You cannot. Not with my eyes. But I hear you, Clara. I hear the way you move through this house like you are trying not to take up space. I hear you working from dawn until dark. I hear you holding your breath every time I come into a room, like you are waiting for me to be cruel. And I know what that means. I know what it means to be treated like you are less than you are." Clara's throat tightened. "They told you about the bet." "I figured it out." He leaned forward in his chair. $50. That is what Dutch paid you, right?" She nodded, then remembered he could not see it. "Yes." "Do you still have it?" "Most of it." "Good. Keep it. You earned it." "I did not." "You married a blind man you did not know because you were desperate, and then you stayed and worked and made this place into a home again. You earned it, Clara, and you do not owe anyone anything." She was crying now. She had not cried since the day her mother died, but she was crying now, and she could not stop. Silas stood up carefully, putting weight on his good leg. He held out his hand. "Come here." She crossed the room and took his hand. He pulled her close and wrapped his arms around her. She pressed her face against his chest and cried, and he held her and did not say anything. And it was the safest she had felt in years. When she finally pulled away, she wiped her eyes and looked up at him. "I do not want to leave." "Then do not." "I want to stay. Really stay. Not just because I have nowhere else to go." Then stay. She took a breath. I want this to be real. Silas's hand came up and touched her face. His fingers were gentle, tracing the line of her jaw, her cheek, her forehead, learning the shape of her. It already is, he said. She kissed him then. Not a quick kiss like the one in the church, a real kiss. He kissed her back, his hands in her hair, and when they broke apart they were both breathing hard. That night, she did not sleep in the bedroom downstairs. She climbed up to the loft with him, and they lay together in the dark, and she told him about her life. The boarding house, the men, the loneliness. He listened to every word and held her hand, and when she was done, he told her about his life after the accident. The fear, the anger, the shame. I thought I was done, he said. I thought I would just work the ranch until I died and that would be it. I did not think I would ever have this. Have what? A reason to be happy. She kissed him again, and they fell asleep tangled together, and when they woke in the morning, everything had changed. The town found out that Clara had stayed. Dutch Keller came by the ranch a few weeks later, drunk and angry, demanding to know why she had not taken the money and left like she was supposed to. Silas met him at the door. She stayed because she wanted to, and you need to leave. She was supposed to leave. Dutch's voice was loud, slurred. That was the whole point. It was funny. Get off my property, Silas said, and his voice was hard as stone. Clara appeared in the doorway behind him. I am not leaving, she said loudly, clear. I am his wife. This is my home, and you do not get to tell me what I am supposed to do. Dutch stared at her. Then he started laughing. You think he loves you? You think he even wants you here? He married you because he was lonely and desperate, and you were the only woman stupid enough to say yes. The second he gets tired of you, he will never get tired of me. Clara stepped forward. Because I am not here out of pity or charity. I am here because I choose to be, and because he sees more blind than you ever will with both eyes working. Dutch's face went red. He opened his mouth to say something else, but Silas stepped forward and Dutch stumbled back. You are done here, Silas said. You do not come back. You do not talk about my wife. You do not even say her name. Do you understand me? Dutch looked at Silas, then at Clara, then back at Silas. Whatever he saw in their faces made him back up another step. He turned and left without another word. When he was gone, Clara turned to Silas. He is going to tell everyone I said that. Good. Silas reached for her and pulled her close. Let him tell everyone. Let them all know. And Dutch did tell everyone. By the next Sunday, the whole town knew that Clara Hewitt, now Clara Grant, had told Dutch Keller that her blind husband saw more than he ever would. People talked about it for months. Some laughed, some were angry, but most people, the ones who had watched Silas struggle alone for years and who knew what loneliness looked like, said that Clara Grant was right. The following spring, Silas and Clara were in town buying supplies when they ran into the preacher who had married them. He greeted them warmly and asked how they were doing. We are doing well, Silas said. I am glad to hear it. The preacher looked at Clara. You know, I have performed a lot of weddings in my time. Some work out, some do not. But I have never seen two people more suited to each other than you two. Clara smiled. Why do you say that? Because you both know what it means to be underestimated, and you both know what it means to choose love even when it does not look the way people expect it to. That night, they were sitting on the porch when Clara leaned close to Silas and whispered something in his ear. It was 3 words. Simple. True. The words she had been too afraid to say until now. I love you. Silas turned to her. His hand came up and cupped her face. Say it again. I love you. He kissed her. I love you too. I have loved you since the day you burned the biscuits and did not fall apart. She laughed. That is a strange moment to fall in love. No, it is not. It was the moment I realized you were strong enough to stay. They had 3 children. A daughter named Grace, born in the winter of 1888. A son named Thomas 2 years later. Another daughter named Ruth in 1892. The children grew up knowing their father could not see them, but they also grew up knowing he loved them fiercely. He taught them to ride and work the land by touch and sound. He told them stories. He listened to everything they said like their words were the most important things in the world. Clara ran the ranch with a steady hand. She hired men to help with the work Silas could not do alone, and she made sure everyone knew that Silas was still in charge. The ranch prospered. The house grew. They added rooms as the children came, and Clara planted a garden that bloomed every spring with flowers she described to Silas in detail. People in town stopped talking about the bet, or if they did talk about it, they talked about how it had turned into something real. They talked about the way Silas Grant's face lit up when Clara walked into a room. They talked about the way Clara looked at her husband, not with pity, but with pride. And they talked about what Clara had whispered to Dutch Keller that day in the yard, the words that became famous in Hardin Creek and stayed famous for 50 years. He sees more blind than you ever will with both eyes working. Because it was true. Silas Grant saw his wife more clearly than any man in that town. He saw her strength, her courage, her worth. He saw everything that mattered, and he loved her for all of it. And Clara Grant, who had spent most of her life being invisible, finally found a man who saw her exactly as she was. Worth everything, worth defending, worth loving, worth staying for.